Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be shooting some long exposures on Fuji Acros. Acros was sort of momentarily discontinued, but it's now back on the market. This is old news, but what is interesting about Acros is that it has one of the best reciprocity curves of all films. So it's great for long exposures, nice 100 speed, slow film. I got my tripod, I've got my 10-stop ND in my bag, and what I'm going to try and do is get some shots with some nice sort of motion blurred out by the 10-stop, and let's see what I can come up with. I'm in Hyde Park now. I might head over to Regents St in a bit, but whatever happens, come along for the ride and let's see what pictures I can take. Okay, so I'm actually racing to load this now because the rain's just cleared up, but I got a roll of Fuji Acros. Let me quickly get this into the camera before the gardens fill up with people. This always happens. You try and load a roll quickly and it ends up just becoming much more of a faff. Okay. I've metered this at 1/60th of a second at between 5.6 and 8, which weirdly is what the camera is already set to. I am going to do a longer exposure here, so I've got my filter. We can talk a bit about this in a second, but I actually need to use an app on my phone to get my, essentially, my reading. Okay, the sun's just come out from behind a cloud, so I'm going to stop that down to 8, but leave everything else the same. So we're going to go to Fuji Acros and 1/60th of a second. Compensation, I will give it that +1/3 of a stop. That was actually what I was using last time. Let's go with filters, and I've got a 10-stop ND. That's a 20-second exposure time, right? So that's what I'm looking for. I'm just going to do this sort of by hand. So let me just sort of pre-release my shutter. I'm actually going to focus as well. That's fine, I'm using the hyperfocal marks here to focus. Right. So let's go. First shot's ready. Close the viewfinder. I can't see anything because of the filter here. So what I do is I pre-release my my mirror. So now I'm ready to go. And this is a simple 20-second exposure starting now. So here's my first shot. These are the Italian gardens in Hyde Park. I felt so rushed during the whole setup of this because we were looking for a break between rain, and obviously you can see in the footage it is still completely raining on me. I'm sort of thinking about the camera and the video camera as well, but the threat of all the people who had been sheltering with us in the bandstand little building just over my shoulder had got me this idea that the rain stops, everyone bursts out, and the shot is sort of no longer takeable. You can see, if we sort of zoom in on the left, there are a few people with umbrellas braving it, and it's one of those things about long exposures that you can really just empty a scene of people with a long enough shutter. We will see that again in some of the later shots. I like the effect that the exposures had on the water as well, because whilst it's not flowing water, it did have the kind of patina of raindrops falling, and this has smoothed out to that kind of icy, smooth thing that we see here. You've got the classic fountain trails as well. The sky in this shot doesn't have much to it. Might be something to do with the stand development, but I think if I was going to sort of present this as, I'm giving it to you as a 1:1. This is just a full negative, but I think that there is an argument here for cropping off the top third and maybe displaying this as a 4:3 or 6:7 landscape image. All right, that's my first exposure done. Let's get the camera back in the bag because it's getting a bit wet. The rain was so bad that at one point I just considered throwing in the towel, doing the video another day, but we sheltered for about maybe 15 minutes, and by that point things cleared up. Because the weather's not great, one thing that I found really useful today is this viewfinder app for iPhone. If you have a look through there, you can probably see me in it. Essentially what it gives is an approximation of the field of view my 50mm lens gives me. And I've actually set it up to give me an approximation of the black and white as well. Using this app, I'm able to get the camera out as the very last step. So I find my scene using the app, then I get the tripod out, then I meter, and the last thing I do is put the camera on. And by that point, I know what it's gonna look like. I mean, there's a bit of adjustment, but yeah, very useful app. And I think this would be invaluable to someone shooting something like large format, where the act of getting the camera out is half the faff. Check out this amazingly efficient tripod placement. I don't want to block the pavement, well, I'm blocking it a little bit with my body, but I don't want to block it with the tripod. So I've kind of nestled it over this bit of wall here. I am going to have to crop my foreground. There's no way around that. So I'm going to take my shot looking down Hyde Park. I got the pedalos, I've got the sun hitting the trees, and I've also got some sort of recognizable landmarks on the horizon. You can see a bit of the London Eye, a bit of the Houses of Parliament, and then a series of cranes. So I guess that gives a little bit of a layer to it. I don't know, let's see how it comes out on the negative. I love these Hasselblad quick release plates. I used to just have like a standard, you know, chuck it on the tripod, that's how your tripod works thing. But since getting the one that's like attached to the camera, look at that. It's solid as a rock. And yeah, they're like 20 pounds on eBay. If you have a Hasselblad 500, pick one up, so much easier. Okay, all my chat about not wanting to block the pathway is going to momentarily go out the window. I can look down here and see no one's coming for a few minutes. So I'm going to break ranks. Out comes the tripod. And this is going to be my shot. So this shot from the bridge is a bit more interesting. My idea of having the landmarks visible on the horizon hasn't really turned out. But if we zoom in, you can see a bit of the London Eye. There's the little tip of Big Ben, which you honestly can't barely make out, but it is there. The pedalos and the rowing boats have got different amounts of motion blur depending on their movement speed. So you can see some people just bobbing, not really moving anywhere. And then you can see the boats like this rowing boat on the right that have been moving quick enough to essentially blur out of the image. The two swans in the foreground almost look like brush strokes, or actually to me they look slightly like negative defects. But it is interesting how you get the form of the swan. If you look at the middle of the right hand swan, you can almost see its beak and its eye in the blur. Maybe it paused for a second to look. The rest of the frame isn't particularly interesting. The couple here, they're sat perfectly still, so you get sort of movement in the faces, but the rest of them come up pretty sharp. And then yeah, this shadow of the balustrade cast over the path and a bit of the water. I'm not 100% sure about this shot, but interesting degrees of motion blur, and yeah, I'm glad I moved my tripod in, because I think this right side of the frame would have been a bit lacking if I'd shot from the original position. One thing that's really important for any kind of long exposure photography is that something in the scene moves and that the motion that it creates on the film is actually pleasing. This scene here, although it looks nice and it's sort of like the sort of late day sun giving it that golden glow, doesn't really work as a long exposure. There's no subjects, but furthermore, none of the things that move will actually look better because of the long exposure. Because I'm out today specifically shooting long exposures, I'm going to give this bit a miss and keep going down to find something that's, that works better. So glad I bought a carbon fibre tripod, because with my old aluminium one, carrying it around was just such a hassle. This Gitzo weighs nothing. I reckon I could probably hold that for about 2 minutes. So my last couple of shots have been taken with shutter speeds of 20 seconds, which is really too long if I want to have any kind of detail in human figures. Unless people are sat or standing perfectly still, you really don't see anything at 20 seconds, which actually could be to your benefit if you're trying to kind of empty your scene of human figures. I actually quite like the idea of having that blurred, graceful anonymity. You know, that sort of not 20 seconds, maybe like a 15th, an 8th, like a kind of a slow shutter speed, but sort of fast enough is essentially what I'm going for. If that involves not using the filter, or maybe opening the lens up to f4 behind the filter, I'll have to see what works. But yeah, I want to have people, but not kind of pin sharp people. That's my current aim. So the intention with this shot was to get the stillness of the tree canopy and then just the motion blur of a cyclist coming down the path. I did have this tricky problem of having to estimate speed of a cyclist at a distance when you can only see them head on. But this guy, maybe he's a bit too defined. Maybe a more of a blur would have worked better for me. The thing with the Hasselblad is that once I'd cocked the mirror up, I actually couldn't use the viewfinder. So I was kind of positioning my frame. I knew that I had sort of that tree on the left, and I was moving my hand sort of in front of the frame before I put the mirror up thing on, so I could kind of see my target. This kind of works. Maybe if I'd waited longer, I could have got something a little bit more dramatic. This is at 1/15. It's very hard to say now in the kind of comfort of my desk chair looking at this, but maybe an 1/8 would have been a bit better, and a 1/4 might have not had any subject at all. So I've wandered around the park for a couple of hours and I really wasn't getting the shots I was looking for. The idea of the video is to have kind of motion, and a lot of the sort of frame ups I got in the park weren't exactly great. I'm now in a taxi. We're just going to head over towards Regent Street and try and do these sort of these scenes of the streets and try and get a bit of motion. Maybe the sort of trails of the vehicles, footfall of people shopping. It's not a very long journey, so I'll be there in a sec, and hopefully I'm going to have enough light to finish the video. I'm really happy with this frame up, but I do want to have the right vehicles because I've currently got, I'd say like sort of London-y cars, like the black cabs on the right of the street, and then these ugly cars on the left. I'm going to wait for traffic to move a bit to get the right sort of vehicles. You see these vans here, not ideal. Because it's so late in the day, my meter reading is just going to be, that's F8 to 8, right, easy as that, yeah. I don't think I'm going to need to use my ND filter unless I really want to push this to something like maybe 3 or 4 minutes, which, to be honest, I might do. And here we go. So this was my first shot. I like the frame up, and obviously with these images, the buildings are always going to look the same. The sky looks great. It's really a question of, are these the right vehicles? How long can I wait? How long is reasonable to wait? Obviously I'm perched on a potential reservation. Not the most comfortable place to sit for an extended period of time, so I want to get my shot and get off. I waited a bit and I did get these 2 buses. I guess the one on the right of the frame looks a lot better. The back of the bus on the left isn't the best shot, so maybe my patience would have been rewarded. But look how great this Acros looks. That sky is so dramatic, and the 50mm lens is really pulling its weight. So I'm going to open my aperture up, and this one's going to be 1 minute 21 seconds. Let's start when the cars aren't all stationary next to me though. So this has got to be the best shot on the roll. It's a much longer exposure than the previous one. And what that does is just averages out all of the weird modern vehicles, all of the vans with writing on them. And you get these streaks. On the right hand side, because we've got the headlights of the cars, it is very much just these straight lines. But the left side of the frame, if I zoom in and show you guys, it has the backs of the cars illuminated by the headlights of the cars behind them. So you get this ghostly parade of, I mean, it looks like there's like 100 vehicles sort of melded together. The buses give those slightly higher streaks as well. The one thing I'll say for this frame is that the sky really loses all of that drama. And I mean, if I was some darkroom genius or willing to spend the time in Photoshop, I guess I could take my sky from the previous frame and kind of superimpose that over. But this is just straight out of the camera. This is the frame. You can see that flag as well. If I zoom out and go back in to the top right, has just stayed on the negative, whereas a lot of the rest of it has been burnt out by the significantly longer exposure. That Rodinal Standev is coming in super crisp on this structure as well. You can really see the detail that this process can bring out. So my idea for this shot is to have the trails of people that use their crossing. Not many people are using it diagonally at the moment, but hopefully if I wait here for 5-6 minutes, at least one person will, and have that kind of ghostly trail that crisscrosses as as the people cross the street. I'm just going to try a 1 second exposure here, because when the exposure goes into the kind of 20-30 seconds, I really don't know what I'm going to get. With 1 second, at least I can aim it a bit. And here's another example of me not being quite patient enough to pull off the shot I was looking for. I was going for that classic people crossing the junction from all different directions to have an even balance to the blur. But as you can see, I mainly got people walking from the center of the frame towards the left of the frame. These disjointed legs, if I zoom in, are quite bizarre. Obviously it's people in their stride stopping momentarily with their weight on one foot as they shift onto the next step. It's certainly a strange effect. And with a similar nature to the other shots I've got in this video, we do have that mix of people that are stationary and then people that move in front of them, especially the people interacting. You can see people stop and have a chat, and then people kind of rush by them, and you end up essentially seeing through crowds. I love this effect, and this is really what I was going for. This was the dragging the shutter effect, which gives the title to the video. I guess that the shutter speed was fine, just that I didn't wait for the right moment to press the shutter. But it's tough, you know, the weather wasn't great, the light's falling, and maybe I should do this in 35mm and try it 5 times per location rather than the way I've done it here. I'm going to take a second one, but I don't know how to do it. So I'll do a long one here. 15 at 5.6, I need to remember that. Going for that minute-long exposure. So this is like my last shot. I'm really upset because about 15 seconds after I started the exposure, about 8 police vans with flashing lights on just went past. And that's going to look utterly chaotic on the negative. I'm not really sure what to expect. Maybe it makes the shot. I'm going to throw it up on the screen now. Let's see what happened. So it's my fault for getting distracted and not hearing those sirens coming down in the distance. The shot has a longer shutter, which means that essentially the crowds have been pretty much washed out. If I zoom in and show you the siren damage, or the flashing light damage, it is really just that big area of the 8 cars didn't all take the same exact route, so it's not like I've got defined lines. You can see that they're overlapping. It doesn't make the shot. It's a bit of a write-off, but it is funny that you set up, you're waiting. I mean, it's like I've said before, it's all about patience and looking for the right time to start your exposure, predicting what's going to occur during the 90 seconds or minute or however long you're exposing for. And just in this case, I got burnt by some overzealous police vehicles. You can see the figures. Some of them have shifted on their feet during conversation. You can see you get the kind of double image of some people as they stand in one place for half the exposure and then move for the second half of it. But this image isn't really going to go anywhere. The lights, yeah, it just looks like, frankly, it looks like I've squeegeed the negative or in some way damaged it. It's not a smart look. So I think that Regents St long exposure shot was probably my favourite from the roll. You can see I've got it cropped and tinted on the monitor behind me. The essential idea was to have that combination of movement but recognisability in the subjects. It's all well and good slapping on the 10-stop ND and just saying, I'm going to do a 40-minute exposure, only sort of non-human or non-vehicle objects are going to show up, and having that kind of empty street effect. It is a great way of removing clutter and sort of unsightly modern objects from scenes, especially if I'm thinking more like a kind of a touristy location where you have that constant footfall of slightly worse subjects. I've seen people use it for things like that famous, you know, that what is it, half bend at Yosemite, where everyone takes the same shot, and if you do a long exposure, you don't have Grandpa with his camera in your frame. You can extend it sort of past the time that people were standing there. Actually, in this shot, I did have a couple start taking selfies right in front of my camera setup. So yeah, if you want to use the long exposure process to cut out distraction, it's great for that. But a part of my aim today was to really get, I guess, the shortest end of the long exposure, which is quite a strange sentence, but essentially, if you consider a long exposure as starting when the camera can no longer be handheld, then I guess a long exposure could be something like a second, an eighth of a second. So really blurring the line between a long exposure and normal exposure. I guess that's why I called the video dragging the shutter, because I'm not going for that extreme 30-minute, 8-hour extreme exposure length. I'm more going for, let's take some aspects of motion, slow it down a bit, and see if it comes out well on the negative. It was good fun shooting with the Hasselblad. I think that by the end of the day, because of the weather, I was getting pretty used to setting it up quite quickly and just sort of hyper-focusing, or hyperfocal distance focusing, and getting the kind of busy street packed down and set up quite quick. I found myself missing 3 frames. You might have noticed actually if you watched my last video on the Ilford rinse, that was because I accidentally tripped the shutter before changing the dial from 15th of a second to bulb. So a bit embarrassing, but in the interest of honesty and sort of staying genuine, I did lose some frames. That's why the video is a little bit truncated, but I'm truncated, it's a long one. I think next week's video is going to be on something more based on 35mm. I had this idea to shoot a video on either the 21mm Leica lens, the super wide, or maybe even the 90mm, so very tight. But yeah, stay tuned. I will release another video, fingers crossed, next Sunday. Let's roll the outro music.